Hi, Mr. Chalmers here again, bringing you another video teaching from home for children within New Zealand, the New Zealand curriculum. Looking at read aloud today. This breakdown is probably applicable to any country, I guess. We all read children books. It's got an important element in their education, and you can probably keep doing it till they tell you it's not cool anymore. So while I'm focusing on the junior aspect, obviously we still read to children 8, 9, 10, 11, like I said, till they ask us to stop. It's all good. So when you read a book, children's book, aloud to your child, you probably won't ask them comprehension questions at the end, and that's fine. To a degree, you don't want to kill the magic or mystery of that time potentially if that's the kind of time that it is. But if it's more formal, if it's something you're doing now during daylight hours as teaching rather than a tradition within the family in the household, I'll talk a little bit about some of the things around what is happening, could be happening for read aloud. So there's more happening than just becoming familiar with story and then getting the moral from the story. The mind is absorbing a lot of information, even if it's not explicit, if it's not consciously said, like look out for the different use of sounds with the same letters or something. There is absorption happening there, and so we've got so many things from learning more words from their vocabulary. They can become familiar with words from their context without needing someone to define them. The intonation, so as the book's read, how to say it and how we use different intonation, which rolls into, I guess, emotion, is different characters, different times, different emotion. And I think that's a social thing, more than just knowing what one character in the story is like compared to another because of, you know, the wolf, the big bad wolf versus the little Red Riding Hood, is in their own lives, to know when certain situations and tones mean that someone's grumpy or that there's imminent danger. And the rhythm that can happen, and this is what makes some books more kind of legendary, popular, is some books have specifically been crafted with education in mind, that the children are learning sounds and rhythm through the way the book's constructed, that there's maybe a repetition in the start of a sentence, or that it's very up and down with how it's to be read, and there's learning happening there. So the building blocks for those sounds in oral language as we read might be, you know, something that you just don't want to go to at all. But in my research, we've got the morpheme, grapheme, and the phoneme. Very easy to get confused, and I may even get confused myself trying to present them. But as far as I understand, the morpheme is the smallest unit. So if I take the word prefix, I can break that down with the pre being something that modifies the root noun. Whereas if I say dog, what's a smaller aspect of dog? There isn't one. It's a complete idea in itself, and you can't remove letters to end up with a different word that still means something by shortening dog. And then the grapheme is a hard one to describe. I'll try to link something for you. The smallest unit of sound. So as you know, sometimes we see a single letter has its own sound from start to finish in English, and then sometimes we are blending multiple letters together to still form one sound. And it's very important because I believe there are examples where a different configuration of letters ends up changing the sound that we use. or the one needs to become familiar with where the sounds are broken up. And obviously we want to pick that up as much as we can just by hearing it, but maybe from time to time it will need to be explained if there's a routine error. And of course we all have accents and we all have local dialect, so I don't look to be a pure linguist and say, Queen's English, that's it. But it's things for occasions, and you'll notice the good thing about broadcasters is in their full articulation of their speech. We very seldom say that a news broadcaster, we couldn't quite make out exactly what they were saying. And so a proper spoken language where it needs to be used leans towards neutrality of being able to be understood. But local context has meaning and use and understanding and is appropriate within an appropriate setting. So there aren't words or phrases that I look to stamp out as being grammatically incorrect, but sometimes it's handy to know that the colloquial language we use is technically not correct, but we all understand each other when we do. And the phoneme is the idea that with the changing of a letter that the word becomes different. So cat and hat both end with AT. The changing of the C and the H is what changes the word, which changes the meaning from one object to an animal. Obviously that sounds quite apparent, but in understanding as we're starting to read the identification of we've got a lot of the same letters that we had in the last word. Which letter is the one that's different, and how does that change the meaning of the word that we're talking in? There's obviously some more complex examples than cat and hat. And Dr. Zeus seemed to be quite a fan of this use of the same sound with changing the front letter, and that writing has obviously been very popular for a number of reasons. Now, if you do, I think at any age, want to bring in some comprehension questions, and you feel like you can do that without making the magic of story spoil, you never really want it to feel like a test, like as I read to you, were you paying attention? Elementarily you can talk about the moral, and then there's a variety of comprehension questions that you can learn, and you want to use that as a diagnostic tool to help direct where you're heading next. I think you really want to move away from the idea of children don't like tests, adults don't like tests. The reason I asked you, do you know what the motives of that character were? What would that be at junior? Can you trust the wolf? To say, what's missing here? What's the link that you and your comprehension need to help build up for you, so that you can navigate that on your own. And then I think that's how I would use it. You could be quite direct and say, were there new words in this book? Were there any words that you think, if I asked you to say, that you would have trouble pronouncing them? So if you feel comfortable too, you can get quite specific in turning the story into an opportunity to run through some exercises and to do some teaching and clear up some understanding. And ultimately, I think any reading at home is beneficial. They say to try to read a variety of texts. The more they're exposed to, the more it's going to build them up in both like perception as well as exposure to a greater variety of words. And maybe at some point that can be non-fiction, is reading to them about a book about the solar system or marine life or something like that. is obviously a different type of language than what we use when we're reading stories. So I hope that's just given you a bit of direction for ways that you could formalize or not formalize, or be aware of what's happening as we're learning when we're reading our children's stories. Thanks.